Good afternoon, and welcome to our opening program for Rhyme, Rhythm, and Resistance, Enacting the Art of Dissent. I'm Patrina Jackson, the Leah Jelen Poorview Executive Director of the Schlesinger Library and the librarian for the Harvard Radcliffe Institute. Poetry, music, and other written and performed arts have long been used to express distaste for political movements, displeasure with working conditions, and disdain for the status quo. Rhyme, Rhythm, and Resistance explores the people behind the protests, songs, poetry, and spoken word, musical and plays, and the movements that made them. It follows a centuries-long effort in the United States to fight oppression of women in their everyday lives and by governmental structures. The exhibition is open Mondays through Fridays, 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. through March 28th, 2025. It is free and open to the public, and registration is recommended. Further information about visiting Radcliffe's exhibitions is provided on the website. Joining us today are speakers Mankwe Ndosi, vocalist, composer, and culture worker; Rumya S. Putcha, Associate Professor of Music and Women's Studies at the Hugh Hodgson School of Music and the Institute for Women's Study at the University of Georgia; T-Kay Sangwand, DJ and librarian for digital collection development at the University of California, Los Angeles; and moderator Patrice Green, curator for African American and African diasporic collections here at the Schlesinger Library, Harvard Radcliffe Institute. The exhibition webpage provides links to the full bios of the speakers, and we'll post that link in the chat during the performance. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the members of the Radcliffe Institute Leadership Society and our annual donors who are watching this afternoon. Your generosity keeps Radcliffe programming free and open to the public, and we thank you. We also want to gratefully acknowledge the Helen Blumen and Jan Acton Fund for Schlesinger Library exhibitions for their support of this particular exhibition. We encourage those watching on Zoom to use the Q&A feature to submit your questions and at any time during the program, and the speakers will address as many as they can. Since we anticipate a lot of questions, we ask that you keep them short. This will enable the speakers to address as many as possible in the time we have. It's now my pleasure to pass the virtual floor over to the curator of this exhibition, my colleague, Patrice Green.
Yeah, thank you so much, Patrina. Before we begin in earnest, I just wanted to quickly share with you perhaps the most famous poem by Phyllis Wheatley Peters. And we add Peters at the end because that is the man she married and her chosen name as an adult. This poem is called On Being Brought from Africa to America. "'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land, taught my benighted soul to understand that there's a God, that there's a Savior too. Once I redemption neither sought nor knew. Some view our sable race with scornful eye. Their color is a diabolic dye. Remember Christians, Negroes, black as Cain, may be refined and join the angelic train." Thank you to Phyllis Wheatley Peters and all her wisdom all these years later. This exhibit was not only a way for us to explore the poetry and music in our collection, but also to consider how we sometimes minimize and maximize the feelings and reactions of women and femme folks when it comes to the hands dealt us, whether those hands are personal, professional, or worldwide. We're either too emotional, not concerned enough about the feelings of others, or we really care a lot, as the title of the movie says. And it's somehow all negative. This is to show that we've always expressed ourselves in any kind of extreme or non-extreme, and these expressions should be taken seriously. I'm so excited for our panel this afternoon, and I'll be leading the conversation with a few questions. So We can go ahead and have everyone on screen. This first question is for everyone. So, what is your current relationship to music and or the performing arts?
Is there one of us you want to answer? I can go.
Yes, I said for everyone, but that makes sense. So let's go with TK. Let's start with you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here today. Thank you, Patrice, for organizing this and all the folks who've made this event possible. My name is T-Kay Sangwand. I'm a librarian, archivist, and DJ based here in Los Angeles. I've been working in radio for 23 years now, both college and community radio, hosting radio programs. I currently host a program on the LA-based station Dub Lab called the Archive of Feelings, and I highlight music from around the world. I collect vinyl primarily from the global south, a lot of music from Latin America, Brazil, African diaspora. And when I became a librarian, I realized there was a lot of parallels between record collecting and building a print collection, particularly if you work in rare books. We're kind of obsessed with editions and pressings and all of that. In my job as a librarian, though, it's never been part of my job description to bring music into the work that I do, but because I think I've been so embedded in music, it's just something natural that happens. So one of the things that I feel strongly about is bringing music into library spaces as a way to invite people into libraries and archives that might not feel comfortable going there. So I've brought in a Cuban hip hop group to UCLA. I've brought in Las Cafeteras from Los Angeles to Austin, Texas. And so I'm really invested in this idea of how we can use library spaces in different ways to invite different audiences in.
Thank you so much. Before we move on to the other two to answer the question, can I ask TK, how did you become involved in DJing? Was this something that you just wanted to do, or how were you introduced to that?
When I was in high school, I used to listen to the radio all the time, and I got really burned out with commercial radio. And so I just started tuning up and down the dial, and I found the college radio station KSBC, which was based in Claremont, California. And I just started listening to that religiously. There were favorite programs I had, so I wrote to the DJs, and they kind of took me under their wing and invited me to the radio station to learn how to produce a radio show. And that's actually what influenced me to go to the Claremont colleges to work in the radio station there. And then from there, I got invited to DJ out in public as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Next, Mankwe, can you tell us a little bit more about your relationship with music and the performing arts, and your relationship with cultural heritage work as well?
Sure. I'm Mankwe Ndosi. I'm in South Minneapolis on Dakota and Anishinaabe land. I've been a musician and actually a performing artist since I came back from my college years, which were spent on the Harvard and Radcliffe campuses. And I have been a producer, I'm an improviser and a composer. I also have been using creative practice, applied creative practice to build community relationships and for healing and for personal healing as well as transformation. I've sung at protests, I've sung at births, I've sung by myself at the river. It's a practice of infusing the spirit, reminding myself that I'm alive and that that's a good thing, and using the vibration of sound to help keep my spirit buoyed and to buoy and transform spirit of others. I'm also a member of the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians, which is a nearly 60-year-old African diasporic creative music organization. It's based in Chicago, but also has a chapter in New York. And that's been going on, as I said, for almost 60 years now for improvisation and composition and creative music. We call it creative music because we want to, as opposed to the word jazz, because we understand that we can weave and sew things together. We can fuse and separate, and that the music has no real definition and is always transforming.
Thank you so much. And I wish I could talk to you forever and just touch the hem of your energy. Thank you for being here today. And Rumya, Dr. Rumya S. Putcha, Associate, currently recently tenured professor at the University of Georgia. Can you tell us a little bit about your current relationship to music and the performing arts and about your current research?
Sure. First of all, I just want to say thank you, and I've really enjoyed getting to know my fellow panelists. Thank you for bringing us into the space together, Patrice. It's really something special. The answer to your question, it's changed a few times as I've listened to others' answers, to be honest. But my current relationship professionally is that I am a associate professor in a school of music in higher education. And that position, that role in my life began partly through the fact that I got here because I am a singer and a dancer, and I have been for my whole life since the age of 4 or 5. And but my training is primarily in South Indian music and dance. And the way that I would characterize my current relationship is something between academic and existential, because teaching in a school of music in the US, where Indian music and dance may or may not really be the reason people come to a school of music, is a gift, it is a task, it is a labor of love. But I really also want to say that I am still a musician, even though I don't perform as much as perhaps I used to. I am still a dancer, and I have a personal practice that is not something I share very much anymore at this point in my life, with the exception of with my students. But my current research, I just published a book that details the relationship between womanhood and the performing arts in transnational spaces for Indian migrants or Indian immigrants to the US in particular. And when maybe we get to another question, I can talk more about that, but I'll stop there. Thank you for the question.
No, thank you for the answer. I'm just so excited that you're all in this space. This is wonderful. So my next question is kind of broad. I mainly would like for Mankwe to answer this, but the others can feel free to chime in. So how do we resist indoctrination and assimilation under the guise of neutrality, of being more American? So how can we protect our heritage when we're told not to sing our songs or do our dances or share our narratives honestly?
Well, generally, I would just say resist. And if you have the opportunity to find some other people to be around. But not everybody has that opportunity for a lot of different reasons. I think one of the ways to resist is to not think of it as resistance, but an affirmation for yourself, to use the practice for yourself. A lot of times in the United States, music, performing arts are set up for consumption. But ancestrally, they were used for community ritual, for prayer, for connection, for personal fulfillment, family connection, fulfillment, for joy making. So part of what music has done is allowed us to not believe that we are small, to not believe that we are defined, to understand that the vibration of music, the activity of movement, is connected up with the essential elements of creation. There are no definitions in that situation. And so to not believe any of the definitions that others try to put on you, you can always sing in your heart. You can sing with your people, even if you're not allowed to sing in the public. Particularly Black folks in this country have had that experience. Singing in church, singing on the river, at the riverside, singing to the soil, singing to the sky, singing to the birds, and singing to yourselves, singing to your own heart. I know that music and singing has helped me survive difficult situations, and even now helps to bring me back alive when I'm feeling crushed or when I'm feeling smaller than I actually am. And part of the uniqueness, part of the power of, and sort of the precariousness in some ways of creativity is it is never owned, you know. And so in some ways can be claimed by others once you put it out, but also is always transforming. It's an energy that can move through you. And so even the sense of authorship is a collaboration with creation, if you allow it to. So when we're not told that we cannot dance our dances, the space inside is unclaimed, is unfettered. There is always freedom within us, no matter what situation we are in. You can sing even to people with your eyes. In situations of incarceration, in situations of containment or surveillance. And of course, the singing is has always been part of meetings, like in organizing circles. One of the elders in our community says, well, you have to eat, but you also have to sing. And the singing helps to bring people into the same vibration and then to amplify the power and focus the power of humans, and to where we come together, we unify and we lift each other's spirits, and we feel the magnitude and the magnification that we can be together, so that 1 + 1 does not equal 2, 1 + 1 may equal 5, and 5 + 5 may equal 50. And it helps us to move through in spaces that may seem untenable, in times that may seem impossible. And because so much, many of our traditions don't believe that there's only one life, you know, and then of course, if we go energetically, energy is not lost. It is only transformed. So we actually open up channels to receive information and to trans information through us from our ancestors to our descendants and to the beings, the living beings all around us that also vibrate with us. So first of all, it's just to never believe in the underestimation that others may put upon you. And the song, the movement, the creativity is one way to establish that first with yourself. And then, of course, if you are able to be in situations where you can show that loud and proud, to make space for those who come with you and who come after you, it is a critical thing for keeping the way open for others.
Amen. Hallelujah. I don't know what more to add to that. That is a wonderful explanation. And I chose this question thinking about our indigenous families, about people who migrate to the US, people who leave the US, whether they're fleeing or feel they can find a better life. And I know that's hard for some people to consider, but it is a reality that we're living in now. And it also makes me think of, as a person who was raised in a Southern Black Baptist church in Alabama, I was thinking about the interview that Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin had a while back, that really long interview on the television show, where they were just in conversation. And she says, I went into the church, I saw how people were praising the Lord, and she said, I can't offer these people more than Jesus. And James Baldwin replied, what Black people did with Jesus was never supposed to happen. So those things that are placed on us, we can take time to make those into our own freedoms when we have to and when we're forced to. Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you so much. I know we're chugging along to our next question. This one is for TK. So can you tell me how music has manifested in your life as a form of resistance? You talk about DJing, but how else? Excuse me, how else?
I would say music is what brought me into my politicization. One of the musical movements that was super formative for me was the Riot Grrrl movement from the 90s. And that's really what introduced me to feminism and and honestly led me to pursue a degree in gender studies while I was working in radio. And so I think there was a lot of that particular moment in time was both influential, both on the academic side, but also working in radio. I worked in a community or a college station that had a very staunch independent ethos. And so we saw our role as to play music that wasn't going to be played elsewhere, music that wasn't on a commercial label, music that wasn't distributed by a major label. And so we were really trying to highlight local voices, community voices, and music you wouldn't hear anywhere else. And I think that really shaped how I came to also working in archives and thinking about my role as an archivist is to preserve histories that are typically marginalized or excised from the historical record. And so music has always been part of that fabric. And I think what working in the radio station did was expose me to music that I wouldn't have heard otherwise and stories that I wouldn't have heard otherwise. Like one of the most, I guess, influential albums that I came across was this Cuban hip hop compilation that featured Cuban hip hop that was coming out in like the 2000s. And so I was studying social movements in Latin America, particularly the Cuban Revolution. And I felt like the lyrics that I was hearing from the Cuban hip hop CD were picking up where those history books left off. And so I've always seen music as a really important form of storytelling.
Yeah, thank you. That reminded me of what Mankwe said about how a lot of this is collective. It's not something that we own like individually or personally. And I think about when those stories and that music and those poems, when they go into archival collections, how archival silences can manifest because we privilege one way of knowledge production over another. If it's published in a book, printed in English or one of the major languages spoken around the world, and if it's printed in a peer-reviewed journal, then it must be worthy of academic rigor. But what we don't privilege as much are these cultural practices like oral history, like songs, like music. We have scholars like Dr. Putcha who do study these. But in the academy, we don't bring them out as much and give them the due respect that they have for shaping the lives and the knowledge that we have. And I wish I could remember, there was someone on a podcast I was listening to about indigenous archival collections and how the English language is not quite sophisticated enough to really describe those in their collections. And we have to kind of contend with some of those limitations when we're thinking about who we're working with and what we're privileging. Thank you so much for that answer. And then for you, Dr. Putcha, and I guess everyone can answer this as well, but we'll start with you. Historically speaking, what do you think was a defining moment or turning point for music or poetry as a form of resistance? This can be in your personal life, this can be in the life of people of your own culture, of your region, or in world history in general, if you want to go that broad.
I probably won't go that broad, but I look forward to maybe other responses that might broaden my very specific take. I will say very personally, my answer to that question is, and it very much emerges from something I heard Mankwe say, which is the way that singing in particular, as a form of personal musical practice, really grounds you as a person. And like we know some of the psychology and some of the neuroscience behind that now. We know that it stimulates certain parts of the brain, and the vagal nerve. And I would very much appreciate any other expertise or insight Mankwe has to offer to my like slightly rudimentary understanding of the neuroscience and how it actually works. But what I know for myself is that the ability to sing brings you back to yourself. It brings you back to your own body. So that's the personal side of things. Professionally, in my research, I would answer your question, and my expertise is primarily in India and South Asia. What I do know is that music had historically been a public practice for certain communities who had otherwise somewhat limited access to social positioning, if I could put it that way. Many belonged to communities that were otherwise marginalized. And so for me to think about like the historical moment where music became an act of resistance is the moment that music and dance became separable, because historically they had not been. So the ability to think of the body as something that responded to music rather than something that was in concert with sound. So I could say much more if you allow me to, if we have the time to get into it. But I think the end of the colonial era, in this case, the British colonial era in India, and the rise of certain types of nationalist movements that tied music to identity and absolutely to politics in the process is a key turning point. And I suspect, though I'm extending my observations in India to other parts of the formerly colonized world, I suspect that that might be true in other regions as well, where music became a site of personal and political resistance.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I'd actually like to hear TK and Mankwe answer this question as well. What is a turning point for music as a form of resistance in a period of history or in a region that's important to you? Maybe it's a specific song or poem or dance or event. Let me know. Mankwe, sorry.
Wow, what a huge question. I also feel a little bit sheepish. My partner is currently writing a book on the science of Black music and is a much deeper researcher into the histories of things. So that's emergent right now. So I don't know that I can go as historical as he would go, but for me, I think after coming out of Harvard and deciding to become an artist and not a lawyer was a turning point. But I think also almost it feels like for Black people since being stolen and brought to this land, every era has needed resistance and every era has needed music. When the drum was taken away, the transformation of music into our bodies, the power. I did not grow up in the church, but have of course always revered and been in awe of the power of singers who were raised in the church. But then also the way that Black music has transformed every time it has tried to be captured. Every era of Black people have had music that has spoken to the conditions of the current moment and has transformed to serve them and to be able to make space for them for us to be who we are, who we need to be in the moment. For young people to say, no to this, or yes to this, or I need to be, my story is worth hearing, and this is how you'll hear it, or I I am human, and this is how I will show it, or you cannot contain the music in this way. I will break it apart. I will shift it and make it into something cosmic and transformational. In that I'm sort of referring to the AACM and the eras of when creative music, when Black music moved from sort of bebop, like dance music, into some astral, finding the astral planes as well. And then of course, hip hop, of course, you know, the ways also that music has been crucial for finding joy, and strength and transformation and healing inside of personal spaces, inside of community spaces as well. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there, because that, as you said, that can go on for a long time.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Same kind of idea. I was also thinking the exact same thing. Again, thinking about that collective, and you said it's something that can't be captured. And it made me think about a Facebook post going around. I'm citing all my best sources today. That is just, you know, that asks why HBCU, or historically Black college and universities, why do their marching bands sound like that? It's because they sound like choirs, Black choirs. And that is not something you can just replicate without it in your bones. So
Not that people won't try to capture it, and we'll certainly make money off of the attempt. And that becomes a difficulty, of course, is to actually be able to care for the bodies that produce the people and the humans who actually produce the music that inspires us.
absolutely, listen. And T-Kay, tell us about a turning point where music was important in your life or in the broader lives of people around the world, or poetry.
Yeah, such a broad question. I think I shared a little bit about, you know, what politicized me personally, but I'm thinking about what I tend to collect in my record collection, and kind of how and the reason why I collect it, or for the stories that they tell, and kind of the forms of resistance that they represent. So to give you an example of that, I collect a lot of field recordings from around the world. And oftentimes these field recordings were done in highly problematic, you know, historical moments, with anthropologists, outsiders going into these communities and doing these recordings. And I think there's a lot we can say about that. But one thing that I really appreciate about how these field recordings are being used nowadays is now they're being repatriated to communities, to Indigenous communities. So, for example, one of our colleagues, Guha Shankar at the Folklife Center, he's been instrumental in repatriating some of the Passamaquoddy recordings to them that have been used for language revival, for revival of cultural practices. And I think that's like a really beautiful way that the context around these field recordings have shifted. Another type of recording that I like to collect are these recordings from revolutionary movements that kind of document this moment in time. So I've done a lot of work in Cuba, facilitating cultural heritage collaborations between UCLA. But in my free time, I tend to go to the record stores there, and I found a lot of recordings of, you know, speeches from the Cuban Revolution. But alongside that, I've also found recordings from countries in Africa that Cuba actually sent folks in solidarity to fight in their independence movements. So Angola is one of those places, Luanda. And these recordings are really explicitly part of this new nationalism and this independence movement, and gives you a sense of, you know, the hope that people had at the time in these anti-colonial movements. And one thing that I wish I could explore are the stories of how these records travel back to Cuba, like who brought them back, what was the impact of, you know, going to another continent to support these solidarity movements. So those are things that I think about when I collect music, kind of like that archival aspect of it, in addition to just, you know, the music or the sound itself.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Yeah, all of you have touched on something very important that happens when it comes to creative cultural practices, and it's this act of extraction, of going into communities and taking things, especially under the guise of research or science or studying. And it's very harmful to a lot of communities. But there is, and I appreciate you, TK, for talking about this kind of new wave of digital repatriation that's going on. The last 20 years in libraries, archives, and museums, there's been this effort to just digitize, 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 and putting something on the internet doesn't make it accessible, by the way, especially if there's sound recordings or something like that. We want people all over the world and deaf and hard of hearing people to be able to experience these things. But this digital repatriation, how things are getting back to their home countries, is actually really fascinating to me. So if you find out other people who are doing that research, I'd love to know more about that. We'll ask one more question before we move to the audience members. And this question is just for my own edification. This is for everyone. We'll start with TK on this one. So who is the most influential artist in your life right now?
Hitting us with the hard questions, Patrice. I'll name two. One artist that I've gone back to a lot is Alejandro Jodorowsky. He has this really amazing way of bringing the surreal and absurd to show how absurd kind of things like mainstream culture or things that are not questioned or accepted. The way in which he questions them in these like absurd ways, I really appreciate. I think he also there's some really great soundtracks to his movies too that I recommend checking out. Another artist though whose work I really deeply appreciate is Lene Denise. She also goes by DJ Scholarship. She's also a DJ, but does a lot of deep research into Black musical culture. She wrote a book on Willie Mae Thornton that's really incredible. But honestly, anything she drops on her Instagram, her thoughts are always, I really appreciate her take. So highly recommend Lene Denise.
Yeah, thank you so much. Rumya?
This is a hard one, and now I just got thrown in a few different directions listening to TK. So, okay, I'll start with the artist who has remained sort of central to my research over the past 10, 15 years at this point. Her name is Yashoda Thakur, and she's a dancer in India. And she has a really fascinating story. I encourage everyone who's listening to me right now to look her up. Her last name is spelled Thakore, and she is a dancer based in Hyderabad, India. And her work has really challenged, I think, a lot of conversations about for whom we dance, especially for those of us who dance these like sort of neoclassical traditions that were exported from India in the post-colonial era primarily. And a more recent thing that my partner and I started, we started going to like random antique shops around Georgia. Like we would just drive away from Athens and end up in a town that neither one of us has ever heard of. And so we've started collecting records, TK. And it's, I will say that an artist who we have been listening to a lot recently is Woody Shaw, a trumpeter. And those two artists have absolutely nothing to do with each other, at least right now in my mind. Maybe there's an interesting thread that connects them. But yeah, I would highly recommend folks to check out Yashoda Thakur's work. And if it's useful, I can put it in the chat or something like that, whatever's useful.
Thank you so much for that, Rumya. And Mankwe?
Oh my goodness. The list is very long. After you asked about, yeah, of course, halfway through what TK was fabulously speaking about, I was like, oh, and this was influential. This was influential. So I think my two main influential musicians in the past, I think, have been Miriam Makeba and Nina Simone. So I'll just leave there right there. Currently, and then the music of the Bayaka people from Central Africa, who reminded me that we can sing with the earth, and made me feel like I was hearing something from a past. It felt like I was hearing songs from a past that I had not lived. So it was very amazing. Currently, I really want to shout out two artists locally. One, Douglas R. Ewart, who is a multi-instrumentalist and visual artist, composer. He's responsible for me being introduced to the AACM and actually going to my musical grad school by going to improvise with musicians in Chicago at the Velvet Lounge, and Fred Anderson's Velvet Lounge, who's also an amazing artist. And then locally, and also locally, and he resides in the Twin Cities. And Kenna Cotman, who is a drum artist, movement artist. And I bring up Mix Kenna because they use music to enliven Black young people, particularly looking at young people in North Minneapolis. They're a DJ. They have run an organization called Voice of Culture that brings people together to learn the dances of West Africa, to learn the drums of West Africa, and to be together inside of the celebration of that, and has been a theater artist, and is always concerned with young people and the elevation of our spirits and the strengthening of our souls and the strengthening of our bodies and our connections. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. And as we transition to our next period, we'll watch a couple of slides, give yourselves a chance just to reset before we come back with audience questions. And my own, is artist of choice is June Jordan, whose papers we have here at the Schlesinger Library. And all I'll say about her poetry is that the more things change, the more they stay the same. All right. Thank you so much. We'll be right back. All righty. So we're coming right back with a couple of questions for the audience. And if you have any other questions, I'll just be kind of taking them randomly. Just put them in the Q&A feature, and we'll try and get to what we can. And I don't know if these are specifically tailored to anyone, but I will try and shout these out to here. So my first question is, if the panelists can speak more to performance versus practice and how to resist the market capitalism and consumerism that devalues things, that defies price tags, please. How do you find motivation and keep your practice personally and financially sustainable? Thank you for this beautiful panel and this inspiring discussion. Let's start with
I guess it's on us.
Rumya.
I think it is. Yeah.
there you go.
frozen?
Froze for a moment. Yes. There.
Yes, okay. Here we are. We'll start with Rumya. Did you get the question or shall I read it again?
Would you mind just summarizing? Yes, just the last bit.
Yeah, just telling us a little bit about how do you find motivation and keep your practice personally and financially sustainable?
I will say that I don't know that I have great answers to this, but I can tell you what I've been doing. Part of what I've struggled with is the expense of performing, so I don't really do that anymore. I haven't done it in years. I will perform a little bit when I speak about my work, but I don't get in costume. Like I don't get into the hyper staging of it. I respect people who still do, don't get me wrong. And one of the artists I pointed you to, Yashoda Thakur, and to the person in the chat, I can see it now, who asked if that's her. Yes, that is in fact her. Thank you for linking it. She does still perform, and she performs in situations that I think are very educational, and I've found myself sort of drawn to that practice because it feels right to me. I find myself really interested in dancing with other people who, it's a form of community. It doesn't have to be a form of entertainment. So finding that has been really important for me. Finally, I haven't really figured out how I'm going to do this yet, but I think I'm going to start teaching in Athens. This is actually a very late breaking development for me. I've never wanted to teach. I've avoided it for the majority of my adult life, but I think like refusing this idea of needing to be perfect, needing to teach it in a way that is exactly the way that my dance teacher learned it in India. Like I don't think any of that perfectionism actually serves me or serves the next generation. So I haven't figured out how I'm going to do any of that yet, but I think I'm ready. So those are a few strategies that I've adopted. Thank you for the question.
No, of course. Very quickly, TK, what keeps you motivated and how do you keep things sustainable?
I mean, I'm really lucky I don't rely on DJing as my primary source of income. I'm a full-time librarian. So it's something that I do for pleasure, and I'm really grateful that I get to choose which gigs I do because I only choose the ones that are fun and exciting to me. But I have to say that I think it's super valuable that we invest in spaces that are non-commercial, community-driven, that don't necessarily have that profit motivation. For instance, I work for DubLab, or I work with DubLab. I've been at DubLab, and they've been around for 25 years. And I would say half their funding comes from supporters. And as DJs, we're never asked to play certain things. We have complete creative freedom. And I think it's really special to have a space like that. And so I really encourage folks to, invest in community media when you can, because those spaces are very, they're rapidly disappearing. And one thing that I love is that we're all, it's all human curators behind it, you know, as much as my Spotify algorithm knows me very well, and I appreciate that. It's really beautiful to have a space outside the algorithm as well.
Yeah, thank you. Mankwe?
I think being a musician or being an artist in the not in the Twin Cities, but in the United States, maybe all over the world, is always tricky. So there's going to be different eras. And in terms of practice and performance, it's all practice. It's all practice. Just like living is all practice for the next moment. Every moment is the practice. So I want to just encourage people to practice at home, to play at home, to play for your loved ones, to play with your siblings, to play with your sisters, to play and sing with your friends, and to spontaneously break out, bring your instruments everywhere. Douglas Ewart, who I mentioned, he brings an instrument with him wherever he goes, so that if there is a moment that needs music, he's ready. He plays to people in the hospital. He plays on the street at the square. I'm referring to George Floyd Square. We have music there every month, Brass Solidarity, or every Monday, excuse me. But to play with yourself, play to your whoever you, whether you have a spiritual, you know, a creator, or to the bird, or to the bee, or to the washing machine. You can make, there's rhythm everywhere, so you can make music everywhere. And the rest of it is precarious. You know, you do what you can. Sometimes it's coming in through music and art. Sometimes it's coming other ways. And that's sort of the reality while we're still in capitalism. Once we're done with capitalism, then we'll find other possibilities. So as soon as we can get done with that, you know.
Just assume, yes, real quick. But yeah, speaking of real quick, thank you for those answers, by the way, they were wonderful. Before we get to our last question, there's a side quest question for TK. It says, TK, my daughter wants to be an archival librarian for the same reasons you stated. And by the way, to this daughter, there are music librarians who specifically just do music. She is in her first year of college. What undergraduate studies are beneficial to an archival graduate program?
Ooh, well, I would say the beautiful thing about our field is that people can come in with different experiences from all sorts of fields, and it can be beneficial and serve you. With that said, I would say English and history are probably overrepresented in the library and information studies field. I think having another language or subject specialty, it's a huge benefit. I know for me, speaking Spanish and Portuguese, having a master's in Latin American studies helped me get the jobs that I've had. I would also say there is a huge emphasis on audiovisual materials, both digital and analog, because those are in collections, they're decaying. We need people to help preserve them. So that would be an excellent focus as well.
Yes, and my little 2 cents is just to please join the field. Please do that. If you have any questions, Google my email address and we can have a chat about it. And our last question, thank you so much, TK, is a little bit of a doozy. I know we're short on time. We got about 5 minutes left. It's a little bit of a longer one, and I may mispronounce the name. The intersection of Mankwe's location and practice and Rumya's research and practice makes me think of Ananya, I think, Chatterjee, so sorry, a dance professor at the University of Minnesota and the founder of Anya Dance Theater. If any of you know about this work, I would be interested in your thoughts about this work, explicitly political and coalitional among women of color, grounded in Indian dance. That was a lot. Rumya?
Yes, Ananya Chatterjee. I got you. Excuse me. Yes, Ananya Chatterjee. And yes, I am familiar with her work. And in the interest of time, I'll just say very quickly that my journey as a scholar, understanding the way that performance and gender are co-constituted in so much of our political life, comes from a book that I read. I'm sure I'm gonna mess up. I know it was it was SUNY Press, and the title was Critical Transnational Feminist Praxis. And there is a chapter in that book that, if I'm not mistaken, talks about Ananya Chatterjee's work. And I highly recommend reading more about what it means to do critical transnational feminist praxis, because I think it absolutely captures what you're pointing to, which is the politics of location. And, the fact that I am Indian, but I am in the United States, does not make the nature of my struggles or the nature of my politics the same as someone who is in India, but that doesn't mean there isn't room for solidarity. So I'll just stop there. Thank you for the reference. And yes, I love her work. So thank you for mentioning it.
And I'll just say that Ananya is part of my community. I've met collaborators. I'm currently working on making music for one of the women who was one of her principal dancers through Anicha Arts. But I've been lucky enough to be able to participate as a performer, to add to several years of musical scores for Ananya's work and the community's work. So yeah, we're all woven together.
Thank you, Ananya Chatterjee. Okay, we can do this. Good. All right, I just wanted to thank you all one more time for being part of this conversation. I feel so blessed to be in the number, to be connected to such wonderful scholars and practitioners and people who are so spiritually grounded in the work that they do. As we close out, I once again want to thank the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study, all of my exhibits team, everyone that has been working on this project for the last year or so. You all are so wonderfully thanked and loved, and I really appreciate everything that you've done to make this this project come to fruition. And to my director and to, the Schlesinger Library on the History of Women in America. I'm so glad to work here. I'll leave you all with one last poem, or more of a prayer. It's called Mother Earth Prayer, from Jessica Care Moore's We Want Our Bodies Back, a volume of poetry published in 2020, which was a time to publish some poetry. So, Mother Earth Prayer. You may want to reconsider only praying to your Father for mankind, God. Considering the vulnerable state of humanity, you may want to call your mama. Thank you all so much for your participation, for your questions, and we look forward to seeing you again at another event with the Radcliffe Institute. Have a good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.